students of Reddit, what's the weirdest thing a teacher has ever done in class? Had this substitute all the time in high school. He would bring this licorice candy that resembled chalk and placed it on the blackboard ledge without anyone noticing. Start introducing himself and say he's weird cause he likes eating chalk, proceeding to pick up the candy chalk and eating it. When everyone looks at him like WTF, he revealed it was candy. Super weird guy, but I guess that's an interesting way to be remembered. Freshman year, linguistics. Professor was an overweight Russian guy with a heavy accent, prob in his mid-late 30s. Had a habit of sitting on the desk in the front of the room while lecturing. One day, class begins and I notice his fly is open, and it seems he's going commando BC, their definition of fleshy patch visible. I'm looking around the room and see many others who seem to have noticed, but no one wants to embarrass the guy, since we barely know him, and it's only a couple weeks into the semester. As he walks back and forth lecturing, his nutsack is slowly making itself visible, like someone slowly blowing a bubble with bubblegum. Front row is mostly girls and I can see they are a mixture of horrified and barely controlled laughter. Still no one can bring themselves to say a word about it. Finally he makes his move. He boosts himself onto the front desk, plops down, and the back pressure created by his mass makes his balls burst forth from his unzipped, fly into the open air like a breaching whale. He doesn't notice, or at least acts as though he doesn't notice. He continues the rest of the lecture, as if nothing is amiss. I cannot fathom how he had no reaction or awareness that his balls are on display at seated, face level about 8 feet from the front row of students. Class ends and everyone bolts out of the room with mixed looks of disgust, myth, and shock. Would have loved to have seen the professor's reaction when he later finally realized he was hanging crumpet for some unknown amount of time. Head of year walked into class, randomly tipped his mug upside down, poured coffee over his feet, stared at it in silence for a while, and then just left without saying a word. My 5th grade math teacher had a pet chalk he called Wanda. He was a goofy fellow and would say things like watched Wanda add the numerators. One day he had forgotten the chalk in his pocket and it had broken. When he went to take Wanda out to do a lesson, there were a bunch of chalk pieces in his hand. He excitedly announced Wanda had babies. Had a science teacher in middle school that once changed his shirt 14 times in one class period, all to teach us a lesson about being observant. I once watched a teacher of mine have a mental breakdown, triggered by a student correcting her on a page number. Cursing, spitting, calling young girls whores, etc. was quite the show for 8-year-old me. He was having trouble with his dog, a boxer, Ike, getting into stuff at home, while he and his wife were away at work. The solution to this was to set up a video call with speakers and video in the rooms where the dog was and chastise the dog over video on the projector in front of the whole class. The dog didn't listen at all, which made it even better. When I was a teacher in college, I noticed I'd been assigned to a 4th floor room with a really wide ledge below it that was hard to see. So on the first day of class, I arrived half an hour early when the room was empty, climbed out the window onto the ledge, then waited with a book until I was 10 minutes late, and then climbed in the 4th floor window to introduce myself. It made the impression I hoped. History teacher of mine wanted to be cool with us, the student. He made a joke about one of my friend's mom. My friend responded, "Your mother," and was promptly kicked out of class. My friend never got in trouble because he explained the situation to the main office and we all backed him up. Don't dish it out if you can't take it, Mr. Weber. Had a professor that I had been told once ate chalk, so I asked him about it. Grabs a piece of chalk, pops it in his mouth, eats it and says it's really not that different from Tums. Same guy once stopped lecturing, knocked on the whiteboard, walked to the edge, put his face against the wall, as if to look behind it, stated I could hide my treasure back here, and then continued lecturing as if nothing happened. On the first day of the school year, the new teacher started crying because he missed his old school and students. I was taking a bullshit film history class for a gen ed at the local community college before I transferred to a 4-year, and the teacher was this weird guy who was in his late 60s. had dreadlocks, and was really into health/fitness, and liked to talk about weird shit all the time, like how he bet he could outrun the 20-year-old men in the class in a race. One day in the middle of a lecture, completely out of the blue, he points to a girl in the middle of the class who looked 18 or 19 and asked who has a reason for why I shouldn't be in a relationship with her. The first person says, because he's her teacher. So he says okay, but what if I weren't her teacher? Then somebody says he's significantly older than her, and he says he's really healthy and plans to live past 100. After an uncomfortable amount of time, somebody finally says there is no reason they shouldn't be together, and he says that's right. And we continued with the lesson like it had never happened. It wasn't relevant to anything. I mean, I guess it's as sad as it is weird, but I vividly recall one of my teachers, who was usually quite strict when it came to most things, and was actually a really good teacher. Coming into class one day, she was late for the first time ever, sat at her desk, and began crying over a breakup. She didn't address anyone, she just sat there and cried. Like I said, she was always a bit strict, so we all just kind of sat there for the remainder of the class and somehow managed to make small groups and began practicing for an upcoming quiz. It was a language class, in order to give her some space. Nobody ever mentioned it to anyone in admin, from what I can tell, and she came in the next class, sincerely apologized, and also commemorated us for making our one study groups, instead of sitting there awkwardly. She was a great teacher, a really nice person, and, with the exception of that time, always professional. So, although we found it to be weird, I guess, we just gave her a pass and moved on from there. I mean, anyone is capable of having such a low point. With all of that being said, I have taught before, albeit at university level, and I still think it was unprofessional and weird, but I don't know. I suspect that it may have been difficult to have quickly found a substitute. I taught an entire class with an open fly. Now I have to obsessively check half a dozen times before going into a class. High school science teacher showed us an old video about the dangers of electricity. Featured a girl trying to hit a shuttlecock out of a tree, hitting an overhead wire with a racket, and falling to the ground screaming. He rewound and replayed the scene at least 20 times, while laughing and grunting. Not sure about weird, but I had a college professor who played World of Warcraft during class some days. Apparently the people he played with were from Australia, so the times they played were mornings in the US. I had a history teacher who had been through a lot of action in Vietnam. He was showing us the PBS series on the American Civil War, and during a scene with lots of battlefield noises, men screaming, cannons, and gunfire, he had a PTSD flashback. He started screaming for us to get down, so we all got down under our desks. After a few minutes he came to, and told us he was joking, that we all did well. He left the room, and didn't come back that class period. He was a great guy. My teacher, after AP exams, and during the time in which we do jack shit, because there's no more to learn, started playing Overcooked with us, and he's just shouting, "I've got the rice. What do I do with the rice? Sushi round." To be completely honest, we didn't think he'd actually join in, but it was pretty funny. High school biology teacher showed us a video of a woman giving birth. After the video ended, she accidentally pressed rewind without stopping the video first. Good old VCR days. Making us watch the whole thing in reverse. Imagine a man grabbing a baby by its head and sticking it back in. My teacher noticed that only girls asked questions and engaged in class, and he reckoned it was because he was a male, so they were attracted to him. Hoping that the guys would ask more questions, he wore a dress for an entire day. My geography teacher once asked if anyone had something to eat, grabbed a sandwich of one of my friends, and just ate it while giving a lesson. Edit, since you guys are enjoying this teacher's stories, he also once told us, especially guys, that we have to be careful with cold weather because the willy will frown and not work so well after he had a trip to Poland. Edit 2, we had 2 years of Geography A, and on last year of high school we had Geography C with him. We spend most time watching movies, meme compilations or WTV we felt like watching on YouTube, talking about sexuality. We had a telling jokes/stories class, and the best of all was like, he made fun of us without being extremely mean, and if he felt like he hurt someone, he'd apologize.